see the way they hate. And I know better than to listen to the people who are calling us slaves. I can feel the sunlight shining.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Brian, and today is Thursday, June 29th, 2023, and this is another episode of Lots to Talk About. It's actually the final live episode of Lots to Talk About until we come back on July 31st and do a trip recap because we're heading out on the road for July. Wanted to spend some extra time with Corey on the road, and so I booked it all out. Pre-recorded all the interviews, and we were going to take a semi-vacation because I'll still be doing the daily live morning show from the road, so that'll be exciting. But tonight, I'm going to bring on a guest, and we're going to chat about being out in nature, mindfulness, learning from nature, and how it can help heal. My guest this evening is an avid outdoorsman that has struggled with mental health issues his whole life. It has led him down a series of wrong paths, but through building a relationship with nature, he has started to heal. Through both physical skills and connecting with nature on a spiritual level, he has helped himself and is now helping others. With that, I would like to welcome to Lots to Talk About, Mike Martin from Project Mindfully Outdoors. How are we doing, Mike?
I'm doing great. Fantastic. Best day ever. How are you doing over there, my friend?
Hey, I woke up and I was breathing this morning, so that's good, right?
That's right. That's a start.
It every day when you wake up and you can just try to make it a new one. I thought that was that's always a good thing. So I kind of threw out a lot about you there, but if you want to introduce yourself, if you got anything else to add to that, I brought you on. Kind of want to talk about your journey, where you've ended up and what you got going on. But man, tell us about Mike Martin.
Well, let's see. Like you mentioned, I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love hunting, love fishing, and getting out there and just being one with nature. Gives you that ability to, I guess the best way to put it would be connect with yourself. You know, we get out there and we all kind of look for that solitude aspect of it, and it can be uncomfortable. And that's a lot of what my journey for the first 40 some pages of that journey was. It's just being uncomfortable with myself because, you know, like you mentioned, suffering with or struggling with depression, anxiety, it's been like a lifelong battle. Those are the hardest things in the world. And I've hit my second divorce, right? That was like the moment in my life that I hit the brick wall. And I remember sitting in my truck that very first night being homeless after that, looking in the rearview mirror going, man, something ain't right. You know, every single trail that I walk down, this is where I end up. Why is that? And realizing that depression and that anxiety, it sucked my self-value, my self-worth out of me completely. Therefore, I was looking for it externally. You know, I was looking for somebody else to give it to me. And regardless of how much time I got to spend out in nature and explore the wilderness, I never took that time to use the solitude aspect of it in a way that offered the connection internally to build up that self-worth. And to go back to sitting in the truck looking in the rearview mirror that night, that was one of those components that I realized I had to face. And the safest place for me to do that was in the wilderness, realizing that I had the skill set out there, you know, hunting, fishing, camping, hiking, all those things you rely on yourself, right? And when you get into the concrete world, sometimes you forget about that, especially when mental health challenges are some of the obstacles that you face. So being able to slow down and get into those sort of things and explore and take that self-inventory, I think was really that pivotal point that brought me toward the direction where I'm at now. Essentially, it remagnetized my compass and helped me to find my true north.
Did you grow up outdoors, or was that something you acquired later? Was it something that you've been at since you were a kid?
It was something that growing up, I remember chasing my grandfather to go along on all his adventures, right?
Okay.
And then he had a massive stroke, which took him out of the outdoor game. And at that point, I was still young, and it took me out of the outdoors as well. And then toward the end of his life, I remember distinctly getting this itch that I needed to get out in order to reconnect with him and to chase those kind of memories. And that brought me back into it. And then, obviously the snowball kept growing until I hit that pivotal moment in life where I realized there's more out there than just chasing the past. As much as it's important to learn from those that have walked before us, you've got to also look at the surroundings of the moment that you're standing in as well.
It's never the same.
Exactly.
That moment, we were kind of talking about before, like being out in the woods and how things slow down. Like if you really start observing and you realize when you're looking around, say you're sitting in a tree stand and there's nothing around, because there's never anything around when I'm in a tree stand, but other than squirrels that make me jump, like there's a 12 point behind me. But if you're looking around and speaking of squirrels and leaves and whatever, you're looking at that and it's never going to be the same. Like at any moment in the rest of the universe, those leaves are never going to be in the same spot. That squirrel's never going to be in the same spot. So take that moment for what it is. And there's plenty of times that I've missed deer because I was just sitting and observing.
I love that line. In fact, actually, I've got the Marcus Aurelius version of that written in on the dashboard of my truck right now, which is "You never step twice in the same river." And he coined that from Heracles. And it's an important thing to remember because, as we go through our daily lives, we like to almost put the blinders on, I guess would be a fair way to say it, because we don't soak in all the details. We take for granted the fact that it's going to be there. And, honestly, along my journey, obviously anxiety has been a huge part of that. And I feel like from personal experience, the anxiety is one of those crayons that kind of writes over the idea of really soaking in the moment, because you want to jump from one to the next. And to the point about sitting in a tree stand, there was a experience actually just this last season where it was the height of the rut and it was cold. There was a snowstorm that blew in, and out of nowhere, this beautiful, amazing young buck walked in. And I mean, he had a rack. And I'm standing there, and one of my rules that I hold myself to is I like to chase a deer that I have a connection with. I had never seen Longhorn, as I named him. I had never seen him before. Therefore, I wasn't going to shoot him. But granted, it's like, almost 0 degrees outside with the windshield, snow pouring down, and here he is just taunting the living hell out of me. And I'm thinking to myself, I call myself a hunter. I'm standing up here in this tree blind, and I'm not shooting. What the hell am I doing out here, right? And then I get this thought in my head. I get this taste of deer medicine, which, for those of you that aren't familiar with animal totems, if you look at a situation with an animal, for example, going about the course of their day, the course of their actions, why they're here, and realizing that they don't live in a story. They don't have the ability to write a narrative around a situation the way that we do. And for Longhorn to be standing there in the middle of the day because it was breeding season, he had a mission and a job to do. His defenses were down. In a normal every other day, he'd have been hiding at that time of day, right? But because it was the rut, it's his job to get out there and further his species. And when I thought about it in that aspect, realizing that even though he is doing that, in the back of his mind, he knows that he can trust that fight or flight instinct that he has if he gets into a situation. Therefore, when I look at my relationship with anxiety and I think about, even though it's not life and death in reality, in my head it sure as hell is at the moment. You
Right.
know, I want to run because there's a coyote coming to chase me down, whatever it is. But if Longhorn can do it in a matter of a life and death situation, if we step outside of those feelings and realize that as a, you know, just like a clock ticks from 1 second to the next, it changes, right? So does our feelings and our emotions and every urge and instinct that we have. They're there for a reason. But if you can step outside of that story, you can achieve furthering whatever it is that you're trying to reach, you know, another step toward your goal, just like Longhorn is out there to further his species.
Right. Yeah, and we take advantage of those cycles as hunters. But
Exactly.
it's great when you can stop and you have, like, I had those rules too. Like, if I saw a doe come out, like, I always waited. Even if I was going to fill the freezer, I would wait to see if she had fawn.
Right.
Like, that would like just devastate me to shoot a deer early and then have its fawns come out after. Like, I would feel horrible. So there was always that appreciation of what's actually going on, not just it's for me. Like, I have to balance nature too. I had 35 acres. I was managing it to be long term. You know, I wanted a nice, healthy deer population, and like you, I observed my herd, and I took pride in knowing all the bucks and does on that property when I saw them in person. And I like that you set that limit of having that relationship with the animal. I would always hunt early and late. I never rifle hunted. I always bow hunted. I wanted that intimacy with that animal. I didn't feel that it was fair of me to be able to sit 100 yards away and blindside them. Like, I should have to be able to get within that bow range to take that animal. Just my personal, it was just something that I settled on. But I always hunted early. Like, I was in Minnesota, so I was hunting, like, bow season. I would hunt like the middle of September till maybe late October, and then I wouldn't go anywhere near the woods in the rut, basically, because that was always rifle season. But I didn't ever want to be in the woods during rifle season because I didn't want to get shot. And so I would wait, and then after rifle season, I would sit infrequently when it was a nice enough day. Like, I had plenty of meat in the freezer, and I just enjoyed being out there more than actually taking an animal. I wasn't doing it for sustenance because I had a farm full of meat, but I just enjoyed the nature. And those times of year made it easier to enjoy it because I wasn't freezing my ass off, really.
Right.
I was enjoying the weather. I was enjoying the surroundings, and it wasn't harsh conditions. But you said something earlier about putting blinders on and not being in the moment and observing around you, and that in the concrete world, it seems to happen more. And I think one of the things that really made me think of was jobs, routines. Everybody's got their routine. They get up at the same time. They go get in they have their breakfast. They get in their car. They drive to work. They do their job at work. And it's all programmed. It's all repetitive stuff. Even if the job changes, the cycle is all the same. So you throw up blinders just to make it through the day. You don't have to observe everything. You know what you're doing. Well, you should. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but this is the mindset that you get in when you're in the city or when you're in town, when you're not in nature, is you're functioning on just a routine. And I think once you go out and there is no routine, like, even in nature, when you pattern a deer, it's never exactly the same.
That's one thing that I really enjoy about what I do now, is getting the opportunity to take people from the concrete world out into the wilderness, because, you know, they get caught up in those routines, right? And when you get out into the wilderness, man, it's freeing. It's totally different. You know, you get maybe 10 feet from the truck and all of a sudden you don't have a cell phone. those are scary things to people, but when they march through it and they realize, 2 or 3 hours later when we're coming back to the truck, I actually relied on myself. I think is something that really puts not only a smile on their face, but it gives them that confidence that they can add to the routine. And I think a lot about the aspects of this conversation so far, and it really speaks to the idea of conservation and of stewardship. And those are things that we look at in the context of, oh, only sportsmen do that stuff, and they only do that to pat themselves on the back. They're only out there killing an animal and patting themselves on the back saying, hey, I'm helping the environment, right? However, and this is like where it really became interesting and fun for me, and also very cool, is in those early days, I actually picked up the North American Wildlife Conservation Model. I picked up the document. I started reading really in depthly and thinking about my footsteps within the concrete world, and then my footsteps in the wilderness. Yeah, I get out there and I harvest an animal and I do the same thing. I'll tell somebody, hey, I'm helping the environment, right? I'm also feeding myself and taking part in the circle of life. However, the limits, the rules, the regulations, and the way that we do things, it was something that was developed over time, right? If you go back to like the hide hunters and the way that they took out the buffalo, every year they'd kill so many, and then eventually they'd show up in the spot and the buffalo didn't show up as well. And they stopped and looked at each other and said, hey, we're doing something wrong here.
Right.
We need to go back and correct it. Well, that fundamental idea is one of the things that within our own individual lives, we never really put into context. We make a mistake in our life and we just kind of brush it off. We end up down the line realizing, man, we threw some trauma and some stuff in the backpack that we shouldn't be carrying. I really wish I could go back and do that and fix that. Like the whole what if idea. And I'll give you a great example. I've been divorced twice. My first marriage, I had a daughter that I had lost touch with this beautiful little girl for way too many years. It was always something that haunted me, right? And finally one day, I felt like I was in the right place to go back and correct that. And not only that, was that something that drastically changed my life, but when I look at her, because we built this amazing relationship, right, over the past couple of years, and when I look at her compared to that very first encounter, you can see the benefit that caused for her, how that changed her life. And these are lessons that you can pick up any which where. It doesn't have to be in the wilderness. If you're somebody that likes to sew, for example, or bake, or whatever whatever your hobbies are, bringing yourself back into the moment and realizing what it is that you're fundamentally doing, it opens up the door to all these things that when you're sitting on the couch staring at a TV, you feel like you'll never be able to achieve.
Right. Where are you located, actually?
I am actually just outside of Detroit, Michigan.
Okay, so you're in Michigan. So you dealt with similar weather to me, but isn't it amazing that you said that you can take people out for a few hours and the smiles on their face when they come back to the truck when they realize I did something for myself, I relied on myself, I achieved something new or anything to that effect in 3 hours, dude. Like how amazing is that it can be that quick, and how disturbing is it that we as people in general have lost connection that much that it can be that quick, that you don't need more than a few hours of being in nature to realize, holy shit, I'm really been helpless.
it is a very scary and dispowering thing. And I think, it was probably something that really tied into my story, originally, and the way that the depression, the anxiety had that grip. But when you get out there and you start to feel confident because you're relying on yourself, you're doing all the different tasks that it takes to get, not necessarily just to get through, but to really enjoy. It brings you out of this sense of survival mode. And it really makes you feel empowered. And that is, I believe, one of the most important principles to be able to balance your circle and balance yourself and really live in harmony with who you're supposed to be.
Yeah. I think a lot of the issues that people have, and I think there's a lot of self-diagnosis of some mental illness is probably not. I think it's more of a reaction to the conditions that were put in. And not that that's not mental illness, but the amazing change that you can see when you remove yourself from all the bullshit, looking at social media. So I have this weird double-edged sword, I want to get away from it, but doing what I do, you kind of have to be in it. Like, that's how you get your message out. That's how you promote yourself. And I may be talking about my life, but I need to put that out there in front of eyes. So dabbling in it and understanding what I think of it. So I'm trying to put out more content that I consume. That's always my goal. It never really happens, but I want to put out more posts than I read in a day. It is what it is. You can have lofty goals, but anyway, getting out of that that soundbite stuff, the triggers, these social media platforms are engineered to cause that anxiety, cause that attention deficit, the hyperactivity. That is what they're designed to do. And when you turn it off and you just look at a tree or you look at a stream, it's amazing how much that brings you out and how fast it can happen.
It really does. And, I can relate completely to that because obviously with my project, getting it out there, you have to have a voice on social media, right? And then when you're doing the kind of work that we do, you do put a very personal spin and a very personal touch on it. You actually put yourself out there. And when I listen to you talk about it, it instantly brings up this idea of how one would go about visually seeing the ability to step back away from it and not absorb it that way. And the idea that comes to mind is the idea of, how the process of filtering water. You're out on the trail and you've got to have water. So you come up to a water source, and whether you're carrying, aqua tablets and iodine, or you're actually building the filtration system, it really helps you to see that you can do the same thing, because you can look at social media. I mean, obviously we have to do it all the time, but not absorbing the personal attack, that personal attack being whatever it is that may be potentially in the water source that you're getting ready to consume. You run it through that filter, and in a perfect world, it removes everything out of that water and it's healthy to drink, right? Well, we're able to do that for ourselves too, but it gets back to that idea of mindfulness, being present and aware of, hey, is this going to be good for me? I know I have to go through and I have to complete this task, but whatever it is that is trying to attach itself to me or make me read and really think about, is it going to be good for me? And, if it's not, there's a great line in the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius that he reminds himself over and over again, you have a right to not have an opinion. You have this right to not even think about what, said person writes on social media. Just
Yep.
because it's there doesn't mean you have to respond, doesn't mean you have to even think
Are you
about
sure? Are you sure? He must have wrote that before like social media existed, because it doesn't
it.
apply now. I'm sure everybody has to reply to everything. Before you move on, my buddy Josh here, he's a good old boy down in Texas and an outdoorsman. He said it's ironic the survival mode and survival training and practice are not the same thing. He was talking about that. You're right. He's never been in the forest and been stuck in his own head. You're always, if you're training to stay alive, always constantly observing. You're analyzing for threats. You're figuring out how to care for yourself for the next minute. You don't have time to be just bogged down and And then he also said that we forget what reality is until we strip away all the bullshit and get out into nature where we came from.
It's very true. And I mean, it's very simple, but yet it's this idea that even though it's so simple, it's so damn hard to do, It's like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't stick his head in the river and expect him to drink. He's actually gotta have the desire to do it. And that's where in the concrete world it's so convenient. We've molded the earth to literally serve us. So, sitting on the couch and everything just automatically comes to you is so much easier than lacing up the hiking boots, putting yourself out on a trail, especially, a couple of day hike and adventure, and going through the process. And that's where meditation, I feel like, comes in and becomes this very important aspect that you can utilize within the concrete world. It's great and it's powerful, and it helps you in the wilderness as well, which is a great place to practice and develop it. However, bringing it into the concrete world gives you that ability to build those muscles, to build the muscle memory that when you get in a situation where autopilot takes over, it's almost like, a snap of a finger in the back of your head says, hey, wait a minute, stop. You got to actually be here and experience this stuff. Another great Stoic, Seneca, writes a lot about how it's not the fact that life doesn't have enough time in it, or there's not enough time in the day. It's the fact that we mismanage that one resource, and it's a non-renewable resource. When we walk up and down a street, we almost take that for granted because essentially the lights are on every single night. The food is there in the restaurant every single day. We've got that luxury. So the essential bare minimum non-renewable resource, we give it away too easily. And then at the end of the day, we go, man, there wasn't enough time in the day. I spent 3 hours on social media. I spent 8 hours, or actually 2 or 3 hours at work that I didn't want to do. To build on that idea that we have this right and this ability to not have an opinion. We also have those same rights and abilities to just say no to something, and actually dictate and become like the most tight-gripped manager of that resource. We don't know how much of it we actually have. So if you have $30 on your debit card and you've got to hold on to it to pay a bill, you're not going to run to the gas station and grab a bunch of junk food, right? You're going to actually pay that bill.
I mean, most people. Well, some people.
in an ideal world, I guess you could say. And the same thing.
Hey, do you happen to listen to the Survival Podcast by chance, Jack Spirko?
I do.
You do. So you've heard him talk about making the most of your dash.
Yes.
That's all I was thinking when you were saying that. Is that's making the most of your dash. And Josh down here says this is Josh. He's on the expert council for TSP. He's the butcher guy on the expert council now. But he says that time is a deflationary asset. It becomes more valuable the more it depletes, and that's for sure. And the problem is you never know when it's going to be gone. You know it's getting less, but you never
Exactly.
know when it's going to be empty.
Exactly. And, at the end of the day, when you think about how all the time that we're here accumulates into this story that we're told we silently live back, right? It plays back as we die. It's better and more fulfilling to be able to look back and have this life that you actually intended and wanted to live. And it gets back to the idea of purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
And finding exactly what your purpose is. And this is the kind of stuff that I really enjoy helping somebody explore.
For sure, for sure. I do a question every morning on my show, and a couple days ago it was what are two things that are still on your bucket list or something like that. And my wife and I were having a discussion about it, and we were talking about the fact that I really don't feel like I have a bucket list since I've changed gears and have tried to live more in the moment, have tried to do what I wanted when I wanted, whenever it was logistically possible. But I think that really takes the idea of a bucket list and makes it irrelevant, because if you're living in the moment and you're doing everything that you want to, you're fulfilling that bucket list as you're going.
But that's kind of the thing, is being open and willing to expand your horizons. It makes that bucket list almost constantly evolve, right?
Right.
So if you take that gigantic picture and you shrink it down to a little morsel that we call a 24-hour day, and you achieve everything that you have laid out for the day, as you begin to expand, we'll call that essentially a shelter, right? You're in this little survival situation. You've built your shelter. You've got that most important thing set. So now you can start to look for a way to build a fire. And then as you get the fire, you start to expand and make yourself more comfortable. And to me, that's the same diagram of a bucket list. Is I've got this primary place I want to be, or thing that I want to experience, but I can't just stand up and jump off a cliff and end up there. I've actually got to, acquire this, learn how to do that, explore that and go through all these different steps. So as I'm doing that and I'm present and I'm mindful, I'm engaged, and I'm actually taking a part of it, it may change the process. But a lot of that comes down to this idea that we hit this roadblock because of the fear of the unknown, right? I don't want to be walking toward, say, Montana, and all of a sudden there's something over here that catches my eye and I end up in Florida.
Right.
To me, that just, of course, it's the fun and the freedom of the adventure. And that's really what it boils down to. One of the reasons that we're here, because that's how you discover your purpose, is by taking those random left and right turns and walking in circles and everything else. And, there's a quote from Daniel Boone that I really love when he talks about the idea of hiking around and everything like that. Sure, he never actually got lost in the woods. He got turned around for a few days, didn't have a direction, but he always managed to find his way back home, which correlates into another quote from Davy Crockett that I really love and actually have on my website. Is, he mentions to young hunters as they're out in the woods and they get lost, the way home isn't exactly the one that you anticipated, meaning that you have to be willing to blaze your own path. You don't have to follow what someone else tells you or walk down that same beaten trail. You're allowed to explore and discover things that you may not have ever known were there. And the reason that you encounter them is because it was prescribed for you and only you to become a part of your story. that
Right.
inevitably you end up having to replay and going, hey, that was actually enriching and enjoyable.
That it kind of that blazing the new trail home. It's kind of funny. So we had 35 acres. It's not a big amount of land. We had two fairly large size fields, and then two decent chunks of woods, and then a swamp in between. So I mean, I spent a lot of time on that property, and I saw quite a bit of stuff. And I will tell you, man, like I'd be 5 years in and be walking along, and the storm had gone through, and a tree had got knocked down to where I had to kind of go a different way, like you're saying, and blaze a new trail, not just walk down the trail that we had walked and beat down and cut down and all that. And I discovered things even probably until within a couple months of us leaving of things on that property on 35 acres in 7 years and being out there as much as I can because a tree fell down. I ended up seeing something that I didn't know was there.
Well, it gets back to the idea you never step in the same river twice.
Right. Yep.
And
Yep.
each path in its own leads you somewhere new. That's the fun part of life. But when you get hung up on, all the negatives or the autopilot and just going through the motions, these are the aspects that you miss out on. And,
Right.
you've got to be willing to step into the unknown in order to do that. Now, it doesn't have to be just a blind, I throw a dart at the wall and that's where I go type guess. You can actually sit and almost like part of the process of hunting, pull out the binoculars and glass in order to observe, right? You scout out where you're going. You make these calculated kind of risks. And that gets back to being able to assess a situation. And journaling is a very, very powerful tool for that. Just like meditation is. You're able to weigh your options and see what's going to be best for you. And then you trek into it. Yeah, it's still the unknown, but it gives you that feeling of, I've got the tools. Because a lot of the time, I've noticed in people that I've talked to and had these conversations with, is it boils down to the idea of you walk a path for so long, and then you get to an unexpected mountain. Now you sit in the valley because you didn't expect the mountain to be there. The climbing rope is going to be too damn heavy to throw in the pack and, whatever. So I don't have the rope. I can't climb it. The reality is that the unknown represents that mountain, and it was never about the rope. The skills are in you. The energy, the effort, and everything that you need in order to scale the unknown is acquired along that path and that trail, and to bring yourself presently into the moment and look at the situation becomes that rope. You're able to build it yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So I had something on your list here that you had on your profile to talk about is animal medicine, and this kind of piqued my interest. We kind of got into exploring different things through the medical industry and things like that. So anytime I see anything that doesn't say mainstream medicine and somebody wants to talk about it, man, what are we talking about with animal medicine?
All right. Well, honestly, animal medicine is a very spiritual thing, and it boils down to it was something that was really prevalent within Native American culture. And as we talked about earlier with the story with Longhorn, that right there is a dose of animal medicine. Now, I can give you another great example, because what it is it's something that helps you to identify a situation within yourself, right? Like with a lot of the things that I've gone through, trusting people and being willing to engage in real engaging relationships is something that I struggle with and almost want to turn and go the other way. Now, it's also admitting that and realizing that makes you see, hey, I am what's the word? Um, I'm shooting myself in the foot here, right?
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
holding myself back. And about a couple weeks back, I was out fishing at one of my favorite fishing spots. And, I was in the situation in the concrete world at my day job where I was up for a promotion. And in order to take that promotion and be able to really do the job, I had to be willing to engage in those kind of relationships.
Mm.
Now, I've done a lot of work, obviously, to get from point A to point B. However, there's that one spot, and while I'm fishing, this gigantic snake decides to swim across the river and just, sprawl out on a log about 5 feet away from me and just sit there. And the more I thought about it, what a snake represents isn't all of those scary, fearful things. Yeah, obviously, a lot of us are afraid of snakes. However, when I think about in a context to the situation that I'm facing in the concrete world, in order for a snake to grow, they shed their skin, right? And as they shed their skin and they grow, those logs and different things that they have to navigate don't feel so tiny. And for me, being able to be willing to accept that I've grown and shed that layer of fear or that hang up, or actually wrap a bandage around my foot and let it heal, it was the power to step forth, take that spot, and then be able to actually make it mine. And even to continue that story, it was funny because a couple days later I came into the deer blind to sit down and start writing, and out of nowhere there was this little baby raccoon that decided to come hang out here with me. Now, a raccoon represents many different masks, right? If you look at its face, it wears a mask. And it's something that we all do. We all try to hide behind these different things because, number one, we're scared of what's behind it. Number two, it's just too much damn work to admit, hey, I got a problem and I gotta deal with it, right?
You got to be perfect. Everybody's perfect, man.
Exactly.
There's nothing wrong with anybody. Everybody's normal. You're just weird, so you better pretend.
Exactly. And these are the kind of things that, when you see, well, really it comes off of the animal totems. And when you see these different signs from animals that enter your path and whatnot, these are the kind of lessons that, yeah, they're not living in a story. I'm the one writing the story that I think he's living. However, these are the kind of things that they help you in order to heal yourself and grow and become prosperous and make all those giant leaps forward.
Right. It's funny. So you're talking animal totems and stoicism and things like that. And I think back to, so I started doing these interviews and I pulled them out as their own kind of podcast feed. And I'm going back and thinking about the interviews I've had. And I've talked to somebody at length about animal totems. And I've talked to a whole episode about stoicism. And I'm like, I'm drawn to people that understand these things, I think, because A, I'm learning from you, and B, I think we're like-minded. We think very similarly, but I can also learn from you, and I think you could probably learn from me because we understand those things.
And that's where letting go of the ego comes into play, because you're willing to admit, hey, I don't know everything. That's like a giant step. And a lot of us get caught up on, hey, I know everything, I can do all this. So
I want to know everything.
Right. So there's nothing more that I can do. And you know what? When you're in that mindset, you're right. You can't go any further. However, if you really want to go forward, you have to open yourself up. You have to almost put the ego down and humble yourself. It's it's a lot of the idea of embracing the suck factor in life. Because you run into a situation and you're like, man, sucks. This is stupid. I feel so dumb right now because I don't know that. And guess what? That's okay. Give yourself the grace to say, hey, maybe I didn't know that, but I just learned it now.
Yeah.
And now I get to add that to my vocabulary.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think you were saying embrace the suck too. Is like there's shitty things you have to do in life, man.
Yes.
It is. It like there is shitty stuff. I'm never going to take some child and look at them and say your life is going to be peaches and cream. You're never going to have to deal with anything shitty. Life sucks. It really does. Like, I think about the fact, like, if I wasn't in the world and like I'm trying to like dip out of the world, like my wife and I are kind of like, we kind of network with our own people, we're traveling around in the RV, we're doing things different, but I look at people that are in that like cocoon of that we talked about in the concrete world and how fragile they are and how they look at something and just lose their mind because it's the most horrible experience they've ever had. And then I think about the fact that I live in an RV. I've put myself in this situation. I'm not saying, feel bad for me or anything, but we do things a little harder than need be. I have 3 St. Bernards in a 35-foot travel trailer with everything I own. We do things a little harder than need be. But then I think even further back to people that survived in the wilderness on their skills, the people that like frontiersmen or even prior to that, and what their shitty day looked like. Like their days were shitty all the time compared to what we're doing. But what did they consider a shitty day? Like when they got bit by a bear? Like how can I look at what they went through and what they accomplished and say that, I had a flat tire, so my day was ruined? Really?
I think it goes into the context though. The context of the world that we live in. But you have to challenge yourself. Seneca talked a lot also about this idea that you fear the man that has never faced adversity, because adversity is the only way that you're ever going to know what is inside of you. It's the only way you can really uncover what you're capable of doing. And to get out into the wilderness again, think about the idea of sleeping in a tent in the middle of the winter when there's a blizzard going on and it's below 0. It sucks. It can be done. But guess what? You're going to learn so much about yourself and resilience that when you come back into the real world and you face, man, I'm on the freeway, my tire just blew. I got this. That confidence level, right? And no, go ahead.
So adversity, you're saying adversity causes you to really find out what you're made of. And all it made me want to say is how many stories have you heard people that said, I didn't have any other thing I could do and I made it work. I was down to my last $100 in the bank account and I made my business work. Or I came up with this idea when I had no other choice. It's when people's backs are against the wall and they're facing adversity and they're willing to tackle that, that's when things flourish. People don't grow as much when it's like, oh, okay, well, I could do a little better or I'll be okay. Like things happen when it needs to happen and you really are willing to tackle that.
And that's where it gets back to that idea that, I shared earlier, where everything is prescribed specifically for you. We've got to embrace it. Don't run away from it. The obstacles and the impediments that we face, those are the way. You've got to suck it up and embrace that suck, as we talked about, and just do it. Put your head down and, whatever it takes to get through it. And then when you get on the other side, you're like, man, I didn't know I could do that. And, there's a story that I heard years ago about a guy that was he was a victim of a bear attack. And he got mauled, got his face ripped off and everything, but he survived. And being pulled out of the woods, his eyeball hanging out of his head, on nothing but an aspirin, giving them flight directions on how to get him to the hospital.
Right.
Those
Right.
are the kind of moments, yeah, a lot of us will never have to face, thank God. However, anything that you look at or you experience, you could write a story within your own head that says, man, I'm bleeding out, my eyeball's hanging out of my head. I got to get these guys to fly me to the hospital.
Right.
And you do it because there's no other choice. The other choice is what? To go sit in the corner and let life pass you by?
Die.
Pretty much.
I got a listener that blew his thumb off with a firearm malfunction at the range. He was by himself, and he's like, it was like I didn't even know it happened. He applied a tourniquet. He got it. He had safety training. He had survival training. He had all the training, and he just went into automatic mode, drove himself to the hospital, and then realized, holy shit, I blew my finger off. He's like, but it was just like instant, and that trauma and that shock. And if he hadn't gone through those motions, I don't think it would have happened. But yeah, those moments, and you go, what would I do? What would I do? Would I curl up and sit at the range and bleed out, or would I figure out what to do? Like, can I calm myself? Can I be mindful in that moment? Like, that's the ultimate goal, is in that amount of adversity, be able to be mindful, be able to be in that situation and slow everything down. Like, holy crap, that's like Zen level there.
And it's something that we can all achieve. It comes down to a matter of testing yourself and also training yourself. We talk about all the time the idea of going to the gym and doing the physical work, right? But the mindful aspect is the exact same thing. You might not say, your biceps might not get bigger because you're meditating or you're journaling or anything like that, but you're in the dojo. You're working through all these problems and you're getting yourself ready. For example, having the medical training to survive a situation like that. And that's something that I feel like we all need to prioritize a lot more, is doing that mental work to be prepared.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I realized when he put it in the comments, Josh, the guy that's been commenting, he stabbed himself in the leg with a samurai sword. He was into some pretty cool martial arts and stuff, and he hadn't done it for quite a while, and he was a little rusty, and he tried to do something he really shouldn't have, and he stabbed himself in the thigh. And he said, if he had freaked out in that moment, he'd probably be dead. But it was one of those, I know what to do, I just need to do it and freak out later, for sure.
Right. And I got a small version or example of that. Recently I was out on a camping trip with the kids and splitting firewood. I ended up putting the axe halfway through my thumb. Now, had I flipped out, obviously with two young kids, it would have been a disaster, right? But I went through the process of taking care of it and everything else, and neither one of them ever actually knew. They thought I was still chopping firewood.
Right.
And that's just from repetitive practice and, actually thinking through worst case scenarios, the uncomfortable stuff, and not shying away from being ready. And there's nothing more important than the idea of investment now, so that later on you live.
Right. Oh, for sure. That, and those stories, like the stories of you and your thumb, and Josh and samurai sword, and Sean and having his firearm malfunction, makes you realize, I really need to figure this out. Like, I really should. Like, I'm being irresponsible to myself and my wife, because if I freak out and something's happening, that affects her. Like, I need to be a responsible human being and be ready if something happens. But then you also have to pump the brakes and make sure you don't go absolutely overboard trying to prepare for any possible scenario in the world. Like, there's that heavy balance there. And I think there's some practical stuff that you can really go after and achieve.
No, I think you're absolutely right. You don't go running around sounding the alarm. But I want to pose an idea here is the fact that when these situations do come up and you embrace them and you realize that really, even though it was kind of like a tragic moment, there's beauty on the other side. So, you're able to see that, yeah, I got to go through it, but there's something good that's going to come out of it. And one of the companies that has jumped on my camp, they're called My Medic, was actually founded based on that. The fact that, their father was in a car crash, cost him his life. Nobody was prepared, and that was the result. So out of that, they turned their mission in life to helping others be prepared and be ready should they face those kind of situations. And, for all the stoicism we've kind of thrown out there, I don't know if you realize or not, but stoicism was actually founded on a tragedy. Because Zeno the Great, the original, the guy that founded stoicism, he was a merchant and he lost his riches and his life savings when his ship went down. He washed up in Athens, and he could have turned to the bottle and become a drunk and just kind of lived out his days, whatever. However, he stumbled into a bookstore and he just happened to hear somebody speaking who he got up and asked, well, hey, where can I find somebody like that? And as fate would have it, his teacher just happened to be passing by and he was pointed that direction. Project Mindfully Outdoors, my project, is out there to benefit and help people based on my own tragedy and things that I've gone through and experienced. And just like the work that you do, you put these conversations out here based on things that you've been through. As a tribe, we're all here individually trying to scratch and claw our way through, but realizing that even though that's the independent mission, as a group, we can collectively come together and make that mission a little bit easier by sharing our experiences and helping each other is something that is a very, very beautiful and amazing part of the human experience to be able to take part in.
Yeah, I think having these conversations, you and I, two guys sitting here with beards and baseball hats and bullshitting about like the shit that we've been through, and it's okay. Like, we can talk about this shit. We can talk about being okay and use the woo woo of, using nature to make yourself feel a little better, make yourself get through the day more effectively and be a better fucking person in general.
Exactly.
Like, I find myself, the more I'm in nature, when I'm not in nature, I'm just a better person.
That's how I feel too. I mean, if I go too long without reconnecting, I feel like something is off. That is kind of like become it's always been my go-to safe space. But in this chapter of my life, it is something that is extremely fundamental. And having those values, you have to look within to realize that I need this and this and this in order to have that shelter internally. And that, I believe, is a part of building a comfortable and happy existence.
Mike, tell me about what you got going on with Project Mindfully Outdoors and like what you're working on right now, anything you got coming up, or where people can find more, or just throw it out there. Plug away.
Plug away.
Have at it, man. Like, let me know. I mean, the conversation we've had, I can only imagine your project is very, very mindful and thought through. So, I mean, have at it. Let me know what's going on.
All right. Well, I've got my website is the base camp of healing and growth and discovery now. And that's at projectmindfullyoutdoors.co. And when you get there, I've got links to my podcast. I've got links to sign up to do one-on-one guided meditation. And if you just happen to be somewhere in the Michigan vicinity or area, we can connect together and do those things in person. Now, a part of that is not only building these mental, meditation skills, but it's also life skills through different outdoor aspects. I can teach you one way or another how to build a shelter. You can apply that to life in whatever way seems fitting. Now, another thing that I got going on is I'm a part of the Adrian Outdoors Pro staff for fishing. So I love getting out there and helping them push their products. Also, like I mentioned, teamed up with my medic and love helping get that life-saving kind of information out there. Then we've got, tons of partnerships that I'm a part of. There's a book in the works that should be out hopefully by the end of the year. Let's see. We got the website, got podcast covered. Got there's so much going on right now. It's crazy.
Dude, it sounds like my life. Somebody, I was on somebody else's show and they asked me, well, what do you got going on? I was like, well, which day?
Exactly.
Which hour of which day?
Exactly. And to me, these kind of conversations aren't about selling the stuff. If it interests you, awesome. I'd love to help you out. But to me, it's about giving the...
Sorry, man.
Oh, you're good. It's about giving that aspect where it gives you something to think about and to motivate you. And that's really what Project Mindfully Outdoors is all about, is getting out there and building that progress and discovering.
Nice. That's exciting. That's exciting. I'm definitely digging in and checking that out. I encourage all my listeners to. Hey, we're at an hour. I asked you for an hour. I kind of like to stick to that. I like to give my guests the floor at the end to kind of not plug their stuff, but just leave the audience with a thought or a quote or story or anything you want. And then we'll kind of wrap up and take off, man.
Let's see. I always hit everybody at the end on my show with this. So I'm going to go.
Comes around, doesn't it?
It does. I'm going to go with the idea of the fact that we are never truly lost. The Daniel Boone quote that we mentioned. We get turned around in life a number of times. However, we all have a purpose. We're not here just for any old reason. And being within that circle of feeling lost or bewildered in the woods or the concrete world, whatever metaphor you want to use, is an aspect that pushes you toward finding that purpose. But it takes a willingness to actually participate. You have to relinquish yourself to the trail. Stop swimming against the current. And when you do that, you're going to ultimately end up building a beautiful camp for yourself that's going to build a legacy that you get to look back on, and it's going to touch and impact so many people that get to look back on it as well. When you're born, they say it's you that cries while the world rejoices, right? In the end, I believe it should be the other way around. When your life ends, it's you that rejoices and everyone else that cries.
Right. Hey, man, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I appreciate the chat. I think it was great. Your project sounds fantastic, and I encourage people to check it out and grab that website in the video description, the audio description. Hey, I'm gonna say goodbye. I'm gonna wrap things up. If you'll hang out for a few minutes, I'll chat with you after. That's cool.
Yeah, sounds good. I appreciate it. Thank you, man.
All right, man. Mike Martin from Project Mindfully Outdoors. Great chat, man. I love talking to guys that have really dove into stoicism and outdoors, obviously. So be sure to check out the website. I will have it again. I will have it in the video description, the audio description. Check it out. I appreciate you listening tonight. Again, this is the last live Monday, Thursday night until the end of July. We'll do a trip recap there on July 31st, so be sure to check that out. But there will be pre-recorded releases all month, so be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And if you enjoyed tonight's show, please consider sharing it with others. You can find it at thelotsproject.com or on Nostr, Telegram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Rumble, and Instagram. Be sure to listen on one of your favorite Podcast 2.0 value for value podcast players like Podverse or Fountain.fm. Make it a great night, guys, and we will talk to you in the morning.